G'day folks, Scott here. Today I'm reviewing The Invisible Man. So, The Invisible Man is Universal Studios trying to resurrect their classic movie Monsters franchise again. They tried it a few years back with The Mummy, with this whole dark universe they introduced, being them wanting like a tied-in franchise Avengers kind of thing. Didn't work. Before that, they had their executives murder the Thing reboot / prequel by killing it like after it was shot based on, shitty screenings. So now they're at it with this. They've got Lee Wannell, who, co-made Saw and Insidious, and he made Upgrade, so he's pretty good. And he wrote and directed this. It's okay. It's got a lot of problems. On the no spoiler side of things, no spoilers. It's ruined by the trailers. I actually did see a trailer. I normally don't watch them, but I didn't give a shit, and I didn't know what the trailer was sort of when it began, when I was at the movie seeing something else earlier this year. So I sat through it, and by the end of it I was like, that actually looks okay. I wish I hadn't watched this trailer, because the trailer gives away the entire story. But you can't see this and not draw comparisons heavily to Paul Verhoeven's Hollow Man. Hollow Man's a meaner movie, but it's hard not to compare them a little bit, because there's not that many modern Invisible Guy movies. Look, the story, has some problems I'll go into, but for the most part, it's better than most sort of contemporary modern, like your Truth and Dare type trash that comes out. I haven't seen Fantasy Island. I'm not going to see Fantasy Island, but Escape Room and Slender Man and all of these like big studios making shit horror. Compared to them, this is pretty good, but I do not want to overhype it. If you're a horror fan, this is not the thing. It's more of a psychological thriller, and I like that sort of element to it. The is she crazy, is she not sort of scenario, which they presented a lot more thoroughly in the trailers, more so than they gave it away much sooner in this, but I'll get to that. I'm going to go into spoilers. If you don't want to know anything about this, then skip to the end or come back after when you've watched the movie. But here goes. So the whole premise is that our main character, I can't even remember her name, but I think everyone called her C. Her name was like Sybil or something like that, whatever, Sydney maybe. She was in an incredibly abusive relationship. The opening of the movie was actually pretty well done with her trying to escape from this guy, and she drugged him and snuck out of the house with this elaborate escape plan that she'd come up with to get away from him. That was fine. My problems come into just the first act, leaving me not really sure how everyone fitted into the picture. Her sister picks her up, so she breaks out of this house and runs to a little forest and down a hill, and then gets onto a road, and her sister comes along and picks her up, and he jumps out, smashes a window, they drive off. So obviously they establish that he's dangerous, he does hurt her, can hurt her, there's a history there, and that she's pretty much traumatized and broken and running for her life, like her last chance to get away from this guy. Fair enough. Sister picks him up. They drive off. Cuts to 2 weeks later, and she's now living with this cop named James and his daughter, whose name I can't remember, and she's staying with them. They're letting her stay there. She's all traumatized and won't go outside, peeking out windows and all that kind of stuff, and establishing that she has major fears and problems as a result of what had happened to her. Fair enough. Doesn't really establish who this guy is. So she's staying in this guy's house, but I got the impression that it's maybe more the sister's associate than it is hers. It seemed like a kind of new friendship with her being there, I think. But then her sister shows up, and I sort of figured it was going to be a girlfriend kind of thing, but it wasn't. She knocks on the door, and they sort of have a matey, hi, how you going, hug kind of thing. And it's never really addressed how this guy, cop, and his daughter sort of exactly fit in. It's just assumed. They didn't even establish he was a cop until ages later. They were having a play fight between his daughter and him and this main girl, and sort of this blasé, I'm a police, don't do that kind of thing, and then a couple of shots later you saw him dressed for work and he had his badge on his thing. Doesn't matter. But there's all these kind of little story things that wasted time, I feel, and were fill-in stuff at the sacrifice of things I really wanted to know. So again, I've told you spoilers and stuff. So really, this isn't about the Invisible Man. This is about a scientist guy who built a predator type camouflage suit that made him invisible. So it wasn't like magic or science or potions or any of that kind of stuff. It was literally like a weird suit kind of thing, like a mocap suit almost, with heaps and heaps and heaps of little sort of cameras / projectors that created the invisibility. It was kind of clever in that, but my problem is there's a few shots going through his house, like when she escaped, and a few shots back into the house later on, and it shows all these like workbenches and cool tech shit all over the place and all that, but there's no explanation really what he did, who he worked for, what he was trying to develop and all that. And early in the film, sort of establishing this weird little sort of almost like I thought it was a shower, like this little room with this like kind of frame kind of thing in it, and she sort of looked at it weird when she was trying to escape, when she ran away at the beginning, and then they come back later, and that's when they establish it as a suit, because there's like an iPad on the wall and she presses a button and it prints a suit and she pulls it down off of there. I find a lot of things about the technology and the securities, particularly about the house, because she had the security really sussed when she escaped this thing in the beginning. She's typing in passwords and deactivating cameras and turning alarms off and doing all this like spy shit to get out of there without alerting the guy that she was. But then when she comes back into the house later, gets in with the same codes and all that kind of stuff, to build an invisible suit, it was literally just pressing an iPad on the wall, say as a mode, and it just prints it. Like you would imagine something that could do so much, and it was so secretive and high tech and all that, would perhaps have password security and all that to actually make them, but whatever. So, the premise is obviously she's living with this guy and his daughter. Sister's sort of in and out, floating about. You don't see her that much. And sister comes to him that day to tell him, oi, you don't have to be afraid anymore. He died. And it's been established that he killed himself, and she has to come and see this like lawyer who's also that guy's brother. And, she's getting money left to her. He'd read out a letter that he'd written, which she didn't want to hear, and basically said, "I'm leaving you $5 million. You're going to get $100,000 a month for as long as it takes to give you that $5 million. But if you ever get arrested or do something criminal, then that shit's going to be taken away from you." And then for the rest of the sort of midsection of the movie, it's we know he's there. We know he's invisible, hence the name of the film, but they're really heavily playing on this whole, she's crazy, it's not really happening, so everyone else in her life doesn't believe her, all this freaky shit's happening, and sort of slowly driving her crazy. My issue is obviously I'm not being driven crazy with her because I know what's going on, so I'm just waiting for things to happen. I'm not interested or involved in how the story's unfolding because it's obvious what's happening, which I think was, perhaps not so great, but you can't have a movie called The Invisible Man without him being in that state, so there was, I get why they did it this way and it works, it's better than it could have been, but it wasn't that, there was no surprise. There was an attempt at a surprise at the end, which I saw coming a mile away, but it was just a bit flat. There was some good camera work, some boring camera work. There were lots of long, wide shots in the house where the camera's just static and people are walking around the scene and all that kind of stuff, or even no one in the scene and there's just lingering there. I guess to try and make you think, oh, is he there? Is he not? Is something going to move? What's going to happen? But that felt like a half-assed thing of what basically almost the entire Paranormal Activity series and movie was, that, is something going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And a bit of static frames. Yeah, there was some cool fight type stuff with people getting moved around and beaten up by the invisible guy, which were pretty well done, and a lot of camera movement that Leigh Whannell used in Upgrade during the fight scenes with the cameras moving with him, like him coming up, the cameras coming up and all that kind of stuff, which really has that guy borrowing from the guy who made The Raid and all previous movies that Leigh Whannell clearly saw, and that's used pretty heavily again. The girl gets has a anxiety based kind of breakdown and she gets whoa and passes out and the camera falls with her to the floor and stuff, and so some of that camera work was pretty good. The effects are meh. There was this intro thing with the ocean going over rocks at the beginning, and I really liked the premise of the fact that the wave would go like over the rocks and fall, and the titles of the movie and the production company were left and sort of with the water over them which is clever, but the waves look so bad and not realistic. Like the water in like Death Stranding on the PS4 looks more realistic than the water in this, so that was a bit of a thing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have heaps more to say about it. All the scenes with him were pretty predictable. There was a bullshit scene later on when she was trying to call him out. She'd been put in like an asylum type psych ward in a hospital because of a killing that she'd been blamed on, and she has a sort of attempted suicide kind of thing to draw him out because he loved her so much. All he wanted to have her back. All she had to do was come back to him and everything would be okay. And she has like a quill pen, like a calligraphy type pen, and like into her wrist and like it open and like cuts this big thing. But then there's a whole sequence after that where she's fighting and rolling around and all this, and it's not bleeding at all. There is nothing. And then like a minute later she opens the door and you see this red thing. That thing was buried in her fucking wrist. Isn't the point of stabbing into your wrist and dragging something down to bleed you out as an attempt for suicide? Yet she did that very thing and hardly bled at all, just had like a bit of blood and then just a bandage around it later. I thought that was a bit weak. Yeah, the whole brother thing, like that's just completely predictable that he was involved, and the end was kind of okay, how that all turned out, and I don't need to discuss all that. Like if you see it, you do. If you don't, you don't. Whatever. But overall, it was pretty average. Some of it was good. Honestly, if you want an Invisible Man movie, I still probably recommend Hollow Man over this, even though Hollow Man's a bit more rapey and perhaps not politically acceptable in today's modern Me Too type movement era. It's just a better movie with better science. And sorry, where I was going with the stuff earlier with that guy's benches and all that, sorry, I got off track. Why invest all the time telling all these stories and having all this tension and all these static long camera things and conversation pieces, yet you're not explaining the science behind what he did? She goes back into the house because he's been dead and all the same codes still work. She's going in there, goes through the whole thing and prints a suit like I said earlier. Having like a video diary or a journal or some kind of explanation as to what the suit was, what he was developing, why he was developing, really would have done a lot more to sort of interest me than just having this shitty ladder plot that they wrote into the movie, where early in the movie the James Cop guy is on this rickety wooden ladder, he's like renovating his house and she's sitting in the house and all that kind of stuff. When the money starts flowing into her, she has a surprise where he comes in and she's like, I got you a present, and there's this like beautiful big brand new aluminium work ladder in the house. And I was like, okay, that's a fair bit of like, I appreciate staying here, but who cares if she gave him a ladder? That really, I think, was only ever existed because later on in the movie, when she figured out that he'd stolen her phone and put other things from the house up in the crawl space in the sort of quasi-attic type thing, she has a ladder and she climbs up it to get in there. And I'm like, really? Did all that have to happen just to explain she knew where a ladder was and where to get it to put it underneath this thing just so she'd climb up into the roof and find this bullshit? Like, it's like a whole bunch of shit I didn't need to know, when the shit I did need to know about how he became invisible, why he became invisible, and so on and so forth isn't touched on at all. That's a mystery that probably should have been explained as opposed to a ladder nobody gives a fuck about. That's it. I'm done. I hope you enjoyed. If you do see it, if not, whatever, I'll be back to review something else soon. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already and you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back again soon. Cheers.